Hi and welcome to our program. Today we are visiting Mosaik Museum. We're gonna check out the exhibition The Life of the Dead and Home. Let's see it. How did you select which parts of the world would you talk about?
In the exhibition here?
Yeah.
I mean, it was based on what we had in the collections and which groups we were collaborating with at the time, and which cases we thought would be most illustrative of. For example, the Day of the Dead is a very iconic example of people who are actually inviting the dead into their lives and not sort of isolating them.
Yep.
So there's a real contrast there, even though it's a similar religion to the biggest religion in Denmark, but it was still a very iconic case. And then we have all the masks and all the ancestor worship is also a very sort of interesting contrast to the way we perceive of death and the dead, because of the lacking distinction between body and soul, and everything is very different from what we experience. And this is probably the best example in this exhibition of a weird kind of fusion. As you can hear, there's thunder in here, and that's because the Yungu, which is an indigenous group of northern Australia, an Aborigine group up in the far north of Queensland in Australia, they used to have this annual ritual when the rainy season started, the rain clouds would come and you'd hear the thunder that you've just heard before. These rain clouds would come in and everybody would gather, and they would remember the people who had died during the year, because these were nomadic hunter-gatherers, so they would be spread over a big area, but then they would gather and celebrate those who had died.
So it's not like in a specific date, it's just when...
Yes, it's a particular time of the year, the season. This accidentally has coincided with Christmas. So after they have become Christians, after the Europeans have come to Australia, and after this group has converted most of them to Christianity, they've sort of fusioned the original ritual of gathering and sharing the grief of those who had died with Christmas. So Christmas Eve, or Christmas in Yungu, is also all about celebrating those who have died the last year. So you have pictures of, and which is fairly controversial, because some Aborigine groups have a taboo against photographs of deceased persons, but not this group.
Why is there a taboo?
Yeah, I'm not a real expert on that, but I think there is a notion that seeing their face is kind of it sort of contains a sense of the spirit of the dead.
They're like keeping the soul here.
So there's this, often if you go to Australia, there'll be warnings when you enter a room saying there might be pictures of a deceased person in this room. There's a way in which it's a taboo to have pictures of dead people in some Aborigine cultures, not this one. But so they would gather, and they'll sit with these pictures of the recently dead together, and often they'll listen to sentimental Christmas music. It's like Mariah Carey or something, and they will try to sort of make the emotions run with them. So they want to start crying, and they'll be sitting and they'll be caressing the image of the dead person, and they'll be waiting for. So what Paul told us, the man that we curated this exhibition together with, one of the members of the Yungu group in Northern Australia, he said maybe the Danish people should learn to share the grief, because what they think about this Christmas ritual is all about sharing the grief. So you shouldn't be alone with your grief, you should share it. So that's why they meet at this specific time of year and share the grief and say, oh, you lost your brother, and look at the picture of him. You totally opposite of how you how I deal with you if I met you and your brother had just died. I wouldn't say, look, there's a picture of him. Oh, he's dead. That would be very sort of taboo in our part of the world. But that's what they would do. And And what Paul here, he told us, we should try to teach the Danish people to be a little bit better at sharing their grief. Because we told him, of course, this idea behind the exhibition that people often feel isolated with grief. They often feel alone, especially at Christmas, really, in Denmark. It's one of the most the days of the year that can be most lonely, because if you've recently lost an elderly person who lost their husband or their wife, sitting alone on Christmas Eve. It's horrible to think about. And Paul said, you have to teach Danish people to share the grief. So we made this very low-key or very low-tech installation where people write letters to their deceased relatives, and they hang them up there. And I've worked in many different museums, and we've done a lot of these fill in a post-it, what do you think about something? And they're often very unsuccessful, those kinds of installations. Yeah. But for some reason, this one is very successful. So when you read some of the signs, they're fairly serious. I mean, here it says, "Dear great grandpa, I miss you. We didn't know each other that well, but I still miss you." You know? So people actually take it quite seriously. Sometimes it's horrible to stand here and read them. Just when I got employed here 7 years ago, but it was my responsibility to take off some of this once in a while. You can see how it spreads all over the room, so we have to sort of take some of it off once in a while. And I just had a son at the time I was reading, "Dear Dad, we missed you at your birthday. We went to Bones," and and it was a writing of a child, It was a handwriting of a child. And it was a very sort of so it's very serious stuff that people are writing on these. So
yeah, but this then just shows that people are indeed very lonely, and they probably want to learn how to share it.
Maybe people want to share the grief. You're completely right. So that's quite interesting. I think that this. So this part of the exhibition, I guess, is probably the best example that we have in our ethnographic exhibition of a collaborative project. That this is a project that is very much the whole space here and the whole concept for the exhibition, the whole concept for this interaction was done in collaboration with the group that it deals with. Yeah. So rather than having us, looking at other people saying this is how their culture is, it's produced through a kind of exchange and a dialogue, which I think is an ideal. It's not an ideal that we can always live up to. Yeah. It's not an ideal that is always relevant, but sometimes it is, and I think here it's very successful. And the final room of this exhibition is called the Belongings of the Dead. And that is our attempt to say, actually, in Denmark, we also share our lives with the dead, in a way. For example, through the things that we inherit from the dead. We all have, most of us, boxes on our ceilings, we all have boxes stowed away in storage rooms in our house with stuff that we're never going to use. That we inherited from some relatives, and those are the boxes that we put up there, to elude that somehow there are certain things that we inherit, we can't throw it away. I inherited a watch from my grandfather, and it gives me a reaction when I wear it, I get eczema or something. It's nickel, or I don't know. It's
like an allergic reaction.
Right, but that doesn't mean I throw it out. Yep. It's not useful for me at all. I can't use it. I will get allergy. I have an iPhone. I don't need a watch anymore. But I would never throw it out. Why is that? Yep. We sometimes ask the school children that sort of question, because if you look at all the masks and all the figures and all the skulls that are giving presents to the dead, and that Papua New Guineans or people in parts of Africa or people somewhere in Oceania say, the dead spirit is living in this thing. Yeah. You'd say, no, you're wrong. But why can't I throw out the watch? Maybe because the dead spirit is a little bit living in the watch. I don't know. That could be the reason we all have those boxes. We don't just throw them out. That somehow we also have a feeling that our deceased relatives are living on in their belongings. That we feel a sense of community with our deceased when we wear their clothes, for example, or use the items that we've inherited from them. So this is the case of a young man whose uncle died fairly young. He's,
I have pictures.
yeah, you see the pictures going there. His uncle was a ballroom dancer, a professional dancer.
Okay.
And he died from AIDS back in the 80s before the treatment was good for that disease. And this son then inherits his outfit that he was using as a ballroom dancer. So he got through his confirmation, his initiation, wearing the tuxedo of his dead uncle. And after that, this boy began feeling a sense of connection with this uncle. He began, as he grew up, to also feel that this uncle had been homosexual in a small city in Jutland, so he had felt outside a little bit. It felt a bit odd in the community he was living in. And this young boy also felt a bit odd for other reasons. And so in that sense, he felt a sense of connection with this deceased uncle. And he also inherited all his old records, all his 80s disco hits and Tina Turner and everything. So this young man sort of also says that he feels a kind of presence of his uncle when he's listening to the records or wearing the tuxedo or something like that. So there's a sense there that we also, in our part of the world, through objects, connect to the lives of the dead, or the dead have a life among us through the items that we surround ourselves with, from them, perhaps. Yeah. Here's another example of somebody who inherited a sewing box through the family line and also feels a sense of connection through all her ancestors there that used to own this sewing kit.
So this is another exhibition about
Right.
home?
So this is our most recent ethnographic exhibition at Mosaik, dealing with home and belonging. What does it mean to have a home? And this exhibition in particular deals with people who have a much more mobile sense of home, for whom home is distributed over big distances or is in a constant sense of mobility or movement, as is the case for nomads, for example, in the Sahel region of Africa. This is nomads from Mauritania who are currently in the process of becoming more permanently dwelling in the big cities. So they're actually moving from nomadism towards staying in one place and living in the bigger cities. But they still have a nomadic heritage, and as you can see, they still live in tents. And many of them are dreaming about building houses and becoming permanent dwellers. So that's one of the processes of home and mobility dealt with in the exhibition. The other one is the one that I've researched on myself, which is from a small group called the Titan in Papua New Guinea, who are sort of a sea-dwelling group in the sense that they live in houses built on stilts over the water. They don't own land. They traditionally never did any farming or any husbandry or anything like that. They were fishermen and they were traders. So they were fishing from these canoes, and then they were sailing goods around. This was in the island region of, this is in Oceania in the Pacific Ocean. So the island region of Papua New Guinea. They were sailing between islands, trading goods between other groups there who were maybe specialized in farming or specializing in pottery or whatever. And these guys were specialized in mobility. So in a way, in moving, sailing out, catching the big fish on the big reefs, sailing between other islands and trading, and they were living on these canoes for a long period at a time. Sometimes whole families would live here.
Oh,
and that's why
in this like exact same setting?
Yeah, this is a quite small one, so they would sometimes be a bit bigger. This platform is normally a little bit bigger. This is a more modern version that is built also for canoe racing. So they want them to be light. So normally they would be a little bit bulkier than this one is. But yeah, so they would live aboard here, and I've lived on board these kinds of canoes for several weeks and months of my life, sleeping on this deck. and you're lying here next to each other. It's a very intimate experience, I can tell you, especially if you're lying next to a grown man that you don't know. Yeah, so you sleep on board here, you have your goods underneath the deck here, and this sail here, this roof is actually also the sail of the canoe. So once you want to move on, you take this down, you put up the mast, which is lying here, and then you put up the sail and move on. But they've also started putting outboard engines on them, sitting on place like this, on these, and you also see there's some pots there. That's actually a fireplace.
So they can.
So they're actually cooking on board the canoe while sailing.
How does that work if everything is made with wood?
Yeah, well, there's the bonfire is inside one of the pots. And sometimes they have a small frame with sand in the bottom as well to avoid. But otherwise, it's not hard to put out the fire when you're in the sea. But
yeah, that is true.
So this is the group that I work with, who, in a way, you could say they've always thought about their lives and their way of being in the world as mobility being a big part of their lives. Yeah. So in the contemporary time, you get a lot of these people migrating to the big cities, working there, living there, and sending money home. You can see how their village look up there now. So they live in these houses on the stilts, and then they have their canoes anchored next to them.
How many people are there around in each village? Or the ones that you were
I think
studying?
This village is these islands. This group of islands that I work with. There's about 500 people living on the islands that you can see here up
so
there behind them.
500 people, but kind of separately.
Yeah, but they look at themselves as one community.
Okay.
And then apart from the 500 on the islands, you have 400 living in other parts of the world. Okay. Other parts of the country. Some of them live in Australia. Some of them live in the capital city of Papua New Guinea, and so they've in a way continued their long tradition of mobility as part of their livelihood by going into work migration. Yeah. And many of them are extremely highly educated migrants, so they get fairly well-paying jobs in the bigger cities, and then they send money home. And I think the relevance also for this exhibition that we've made dealing with the relationship between home and mobility is the fact that we are now in a historical period with a larger degree of mobility than ever. You have never had a historical period where so many people live and die in a country where they're not born, such as yourself perhaps. Yeah. Who knows?
Well, let's hope I don't die anytime soon.
Yeah. But maybe you will end up living here for the rest of your life. So in a way, they're testing the fire systems. So in a way, these cases are all examples of, in the contemporary world, how mobility and home are related in different ways, in new ways and in old ways. So you have the sea-dwelling people, you have the nomads who have long, deep histories of mobility. They have a real sense that mobility is part of the way that they are. It's a big part of their identity and their sense of historical heritage of their own group. Then you have groups for whom mobility and home have been reconnected for other reasons. You have the Indian diaspora in East Africa who, particularly during colonial times, there was a lot of Indians who moved from India to East Africa and became a local kind of elite in some of those countries. And they are now facing a sort of precarious sense of belonging because they are in Africa,
not from there,
and they're Indians, and they're keeping up an Indian heritage. And some Africans also feel that it's wrong that they should be an economic elite because part of what made them an elite was part of the things that happened in the colonial era. And then we have the Ukrainian refugees in Denmark as a very sort of contemporary case, you must say, which was kind of a coincidence that one of our ethnographers ended up working with them of course, we felt that there was a relevant issue to take up an exhibition about home and mobility, to say there
sometimes
are those
it's not a choice.
Yeah, sometimes it's exactly. Sometimes it's not a choice. So these guys, they feel a strong sense of identity in terms of moving, and they also now look at it like we look at Viking ships or something as a heritage that they're very proud of. But of course, Ukrainians who have lost their homes, being bombed out of their country and being victims in this horrible war, they have a completely different sense of mobility and home. They would rather just be home. Yeah. But right now they have to try to create a kind of home for their kids in this new country that they are stranded in. So that is kind of the different cases. Here we have the Mauritanian nomads who are living in these big settlements next to the big city, transitioning from a nomadic lifestyle with livestock, pastoralism, where they're moving animals from one place to another, moving into the big city and trying to find a better life there than is possible now for with the pastoralism is not as feasible anymore. Here you see some historical imagery of them settling, and this you could say is an image of the gradual settling of a nomad. It's actually a nomadic tent, but the structure that it's put upon looks like a house. Doesn't look like the original nomadic tents that you see here. They're very much more iconic and look like Bedouin tents in a way. And then you have also the dream that some people have. Someday I will build a proper house, and maybe they can afford to build some bricks, to buy some bricks. Yeah, they're moving the house. It's brilliant.
What?
It's apparently they turned it the wrong way, and they're standing and they're looking at it. No, the door should face that way. And then they pick it up and they turn it around.
Oh my God!
Look at that. But these are the kinds of settlements around the big city of Nouakchott in Mauritania, where they're starting to settle.
Yeah, and you can see that in here they're starting to put some walls around it. So
starting to get a sense of permanency. And over here we have the Indian diaspora in Tanzania, who actually came in the 1800s. They were actually climate refugees, really. There was a draft in this part of India that they came from, and then they started moving along the trade routes. There was always trade routes between India and East Africa in the Indian Ocean. And some of these people followed those routes and settled in Tanzania, where they have been for generations, and they built up these businesses. But then when, after colonialism, after the British drew out of Tanzania, there was a policy of Africanizing Tanzania. They wanted to get rid of the power relations that were left from the colonial era. You can imagine that they want that.
Yep.
Unfortunately for the Indians, they had become a kind of elite in that they were running businesses. They had built up businesses for generations, selling goods and other things. And all these houses were then confiscated by the state. So their family home has actually been confiscated by the state, and now they're renting their own house from the state.
Okay.
And they're sort of negotiating, trying to get their houses back. So they're caught in this sort of precarious sense of home, that they're originally from India, but they've been for many generations in East Africa. And some of their children are starting to migrate to England, so they're also looking towards Manchester and other big cities in England, where there's a lot of Indian diasporas there. So this is a sort of a case of a kind of precarious sense of home. Do I belong here or don't I belong here? I think that is also a fairly widespread phenomenon in the world today. Do I get to belong now that I've been here my whole life? My parents were here for my whole life. So in a way, they're as Cecil Pallesen, who made this part of the exhibition, said, they kind of have one foot in the door always. They're kind of thinking about maybe they should move on to somewhere else. But some of the stuff that these guys, that are making these guys feel at home and get a sense of belonging is the spices and the cinnamon and sorry, hvad fanden hedder røgelse på engelsk, det kan jeg ikke huske.
One of the spices?
No, this.
I don't know in English either. But yeah, the sticks that you burn and there's a nice smell.
Yeah, exactly. So the smells and the tastes and the flavors is part of what we all associate with home. I guess when we all think about Christmas, we think about certain spices and smells that we associate with, and coming home to one's family home where one's parents live, perhaps for some of us associated with smells and atmospheres that give a sense of home. So that's also what Cecil has tried to do in this part of the exhibition, is to articulate how particular kinds of food and flavors and smells are creating these atmospheres of home. So home can also be something other than a piece of land or a territory or a plot where you can build your concrete house. It can also be a taste, a flavor, a smell that also gives some people a sense of belonging. I think it's the same with many of the cases that you have also with the people from Papua New Guinea, that when they migrate to the big city, you often get them transporting food from the home village for them to eat in the big city, so that they can feel a little bit more at home.
I think that is very common. My mom always does that.
Right. Okay.
Also, so.
I guess that's it. Is it? I don't know.
Yeah. Well, thank you so much. If you don't have anything else to add.
Thank you.
Thank you so much for showing us around.
Thank you for coming. I hope
pleasure.
you got what you came for.
Thank you.
Thank you.
That was it for this program, but stay tuned for the next one. In the meantime, don't forget to check our Facebook page, BURT, for updates on our schedules and programs. See you soon.